Alright, so now we're going to go one of our last notes in ocean exploration, and this is going to be oceans in the 20th century, and really we could add to this and say as well that it's in 21st century, the one we're in now. And if you can probably remember and think about the reasons for ocean explorations, or ocean exploration at the beginning, was to increase trade and to increase empires, and some of it was just to explore and see what was out there, I'm sure. And we initially had, the Vikings and the Chinese and the Europeans got into it, and really it became more and more about trade and money as it grew. And then during the second age, the age of science exploration, became more about learning about the environment. And here today, much of the ocean exploration that we do is really based on that, is understanding what's going on and even protecting it. And before, when exploration was taking place, we had a lot of this government funding. Now, it might have been kings and queens and so on, and they might have been trying to expand empires, but really it's government funding. It's, subsidized by the government, the king or the queen, whatever type of government they have. But they were providing the funding to send people out. But also today we have private funding, so private corporations like Greenpeace, Oceana, and there's lots of others that provide funding to do this research, and scientists work together to gather data. So no longer now are we just using government funding to do this, but also we have private corporations and non-profits doing this as well. And really, the next step in ocean exploration really happened because of the instability of the world due to the First and Second World War. And as that happened, as technology changed, you think about World War II, a huge technology were submarines. So this was this new thing coming along where boats could go under the water and could sneak up on people, sink ships that were carrying cargo, or sink aircraft carriers or whatever they were. And this technology really took off, especially during the Second World War, and just grew. And also the government not only worried about submarines, but also moving troops, and when they're in submarines, how do explosives work in the water? How can we use them effectively? How can we find the right places to land on beaches when we are bringing our troops in and attacking the enemy? And because of each one of these things, just a real concerted effort to explore the ocean with a government. And this time it wasn't for trade or to make money, it was for safety. It was for protection of citizens. Now, you could probably argue also that there's still some empire building in here as countries got better submarine fleets or better abilities within the oceans. They could exert their power on smaller countries or countries that had a lesser technology, and that's certainly true. Okay, but a lot of the things we see today were driven by this need to better the technology that we had in understanding the ocean. And because of this, a lot of things came about, and one of them is radar, and that's radio detection and ranging. And this was used during the Second World War to locate planes coming over, and they used radio waves. But even more important was something called sonar, and this is sound, navigation, and ranging. And this includes, like, say you have the ocean here, you have a ship up here, and put a couple stacks on it, and you could have a sonar device on this ship. Let's say the ground or the bottom of the seafloor is right here. It could send out a signal. That signal would then come back, and they could calculate the time, and they know how fast sound travels in seawater, and they could know how far away the ocean floor is. And it really helped in mapping of the ocean's floor. So before this, they would drop lines over of a ship and measure how long, how far down it would fall, and they could do some accurate measurements of where the bottom of the ocean was as they got closer and closer to shore. And Cook did that, and many of the other captains, Wyville Thomson found the Mariana Trench and so on, and they could do that with rope and other material. But here now we're using sonar. It's so much easier. They could just map the ocean floor and it wouldn't take that long. And as they were doing that, it became more and more clear what the bottom of the ocean looked like. So when you look at pictures of the ocean floor today, it really started with sonar and really seeing what was there, because maybe they weren't as worried about the bottom of the ocean. Somewhat they were, but they were also worried about a submarine down here, flying along, and how could they find it and make sure that it doesn't sink their ship. So sonar was really important in understanding what the ocean floor looks like, and those features that are on the ocean more defined them. So sonar is just vital. But really this came from because of the war. And then as time went on, it became more and more apparent that they needed to understand the ocean. The United States formed something called NOAA, and you've probably heard of it. This really ushered in a new era in oceanography, and NOAA stands for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and this was started in 1970. Richard Nixon was president then, and he started this, and this came from something called ESSA, the Environmental Science Services Administration, and Nixon brought this all together, this ESSA and these other administrations, to really keep track and study the state of the ocean, the atmosphere as well, see what's going on in the atmosphere, so make sure things are what they should be, and ocean temperatures and weather, which is vital. So much of the weather we get today is from NOAA. Like if you want to know what the weather forecast is, you can go to the Alaska NOAA site. It'll give you a weather map and so on. So this was started in 1970, and they began to study the ocean and really in depth better understand what was going on. There was also during this time really an environmental movement where people really wanted to protect the environment, and this formation of NOAA was somewhat a reaction to that. People didn't want to destroy the earth. They wanted to maybe take better care of it, and NOAA was formed to help with that. And also NOAA as well would look at the polar ice caps as well. So they were thinking about this kind of stuff back then as well. They were measuring, well, where's sea ice this year, where is it next year, what are the glaciers doing, so on and so forth. So NOAA was just keeping a general eye on the atmosphere and the oceans. And just a big breakthrough for a government to be doing that and just watching the oceans and really keeping good track of them, to make sure nothing's going wrong, there's not pollution going on, there's not something needed to be done and they weren't aware of it. So they were really keeping track of it. But also the next one is CSAT. And CSAT was the first Earth orbiting satellite to study the ocean. And it would take things such as wind speed, ocean temperatures, and sea surface, and so on, etc., etc. So this satellite's whole purpose was just to observe the ocean. And it was just constantly going around the Earth, orbiting it, and gathering data as it went. And this was, CSAT is really in conjunction with the space program we had. Some of the goals of the space program were to put people on the moon, human on the moon, to send robotic spacecraft to different planets. But also one was to put satellites in orbit around the Earth to observe what was going on in the Earth. And CSAT was one that did just the ocean. And today we have tons and tons of data, and it really comes from, it started here, and then they've added more and more satellites to do just an unbelievable job what they can gather data on. So that's CSAT. And this is just like an indirect thing. You take data, you analyze the data, and you see, make some hypotheses, make some judgments on it, and so on. So if you're measuring ocean temperatures over a 30-year period, then you can see, is it changing? Is it really not changing? Maybe it's going back and forth, and so on. So CSAT enabled, or gave the ability to just gather tons and tons of data. And so we went from an administration that was studying the ocean to satellites studying the ocean. And really, this last step here, Jason and Alvin, is really where ocean exploration is going today. And really, Alvin should probably be first, because Alvin came about in 1968. And this Alvin is an underwater submersible. It's like a submarine. But it's not a normal submarine because it can go way deep and go all the way down to almost 15,000 feet. It's way, way down. No more light there. It's just way below the ocean. And through Alvin, they were able to understand stuff like hydrothermal vents, the mid-ocean ridge, because they could put all the way down there and actually observe it, take data, and be right there. Before this, you get on 15,000 feet, there's not many ships that can stand to go that deep. And if you want to see a picture here, I'll show you one. You can see the submarine people on it. Not a very big, like a giant submarine, but it can't really be that big. There's this Alvin at the back of the ship. They have a ship that takes it to certain places. They then drop it in the water. And it does research way, way down, and then it can come back up and bring the people with it and the data with it as well. But that's kind of Alvin. And just a breakthrough in sea exploration, much deeper in hydrothermal vents, or these venting areas way down the deep part of the ocean where the crust is venting gases, and there are these weird organisms that live there. And they were able to discover them through the use of Alvin. And the last one is Jason, and Jason is an ROV, and that's a remotely operated vehicle. And this is one, it has cameras and sensors and so on. And, but nobody in it, no people. And they can, it's kind of like working a robot, and they can just take it to certain places, go really, really deep, and they have cameras and all these other things on there, and they can see what's going on there. And Jason is, I think in 1988 is when that came about, a little bit after, 20 years after Alvin. And both of these really are run by a place called Woods Hole, which is an oceanographic institute that studies the ocean. And a lot of, if you're an oceanographer or you're a weatherman, you probably, if you're a really famous one or really highly regarded, a lot of times you come from there, or they go to study there. And so that's kind of where oceanography is going today. Deep ocean exploration, understanding what's at the bottom of the ocean, and really doing it remotely. We're not even sending people there anymore. Instead, we're sending this device where we can take all the same data and not endanger people by sending them at such great depths. It allows them to get into places otherwise they couldn't get into. And really, most people say the one underexplored area is not space, but it's actually the ocean. You know, over 70% of the Earth is covered by the ocean, and they haven't explored all that much of it. So these last inventions, Jason and Alvin, have really allowed that to expand.